Hi, I'm Heather,
And I'm Amy.
and this is Ever So Clever Conversations with Amy and Heather, the Experienced Empaths.
And today is episode 16. What? I'm not kidding you. We were so chatty before the episode started. Like running a minute late, you guys. Haha. We're going to talk today about parenting decoded for the empathic child and just dive deep into that topic. Heather and I have set up these conversations to really help guide and support empathic, highly sensitive, and intuitive people. Because you guys, let's face it, these are turbulent times and we want to help see you through and really help you thrive during this moment in life.
That's right, and we love involvement, so let us know you're here. Any questions, comments, post them in here. I know this is a really dear to us topic. This one is really why I started Empath Mama. Around parenting is really important to me. I'm also going to be checking in on Facebook, our Facebook group, to see if there's questions. So if you see me looking down, that is why too. But welcome to everybody who's joining us live and who is looking at this later and a replay. We're excited to have you all here.
Yeah, thanks you guys for being here. And it's good. This is an adventure that takes many people. So post your comments or post also the comments or questions about your children. We can take some time here to answer them. You know, we're only doing a short ditty, but I think Heather and I wanted to start out by talking about our own kids to give you an example, because clearly we wouldn't be talking about this if we didn't have kids that we had experience with. So I'll pass it to Heather and you can
start. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I have two children. I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. And it really, my experience with being an empath and highly sensitive person is with my daughter, who is 20. When she was 8 years old, so third grade, she had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. And that set a path of being in more the mental health system. So that was from age 8 to 14. She received other diagnoses of ADHD inattentive, oppositional defiant disorder, suicidal ideation, and depression. So that was a long journey that we experienced. And then someone told me the term and explained the term. There's a whole long story around it. I'm not going to get into that. But when she was about 14, someone had told me about the word empath and explained it to me. And that was like an aha moment for me to understand my daughter. It made sense that she was an empath and feeling energy. And that is probably why she was feeling anxious as a young child at the age of 8 and diagnosed with anxiety in the beginning. But what I had to discover as a parent was I really had to work on myself. I think my parenting, I didn't feel like I really had a parenting style. I was thrown into parenting. My daughter Ellie was not a planned pregnancy. It was unexpected. I was not married with he's my husband now, but we weren't married. So we really weren't ready or prepared for parenting. Many of us aren't, but ours kind of went a direction where we didn't even talk about how are we going to parent our children. We just were kind of thrown into it. And we did it differently. We both parented differently. We both came from different styles of parenting. I think what I learned over time too, is I had to accept me and my strengths and understand who I was to be able to parent a sensitive child. Because I did things that when I look back weren't probably the best way to parent her. And now we've come to a place, she's 20 and she's been off medications since the age of 14. She's, an empath. And so she does have some struggles, but I think I had to understand who I was to be strong for her, to help guide her in a different way. So my parenting journey has been kind of, I know different than Amy's, but it's brought me to where I am, and I want to educate people on the mental health piece. It could look like mental illness, but it also could be highly sensitive person or an empathic child.
That's great, Heather. I mean, thank you for being so vulnerable too and sharing that depth, because I think that there are stigmas, right, about all the things you've shared. And even like not having the conversation about how you're going to parent with your partner.
Yeah.
And, you know, my husband and I never had that conversation. My sense is he'd be a good enough parent, right? But then when push came to shove, it's like when you parent so completely, whether it's, what is it? It's authoritative, which is the one that's actually really successful, authoritarian, or then there's kind of the passive. It can become really tricky if your partner falls out of, you know, far away from where you are. So I think that's a super common thing. I've never met a family who didn't have parents that had hyper opposites. Like I can't think of one. I do know a family that clearly they were a part of the support group for the National Alliance of Mental Illness. It was very clear the parents had figured out they need to come together on a parenting style, but I don't think that was always the case for them either. Yeah. So it's not necessarily when we come together that's natural, but it teaches us each thing. So don't worry if you're in a partnership where that other parent is maybe the authoritarian, the one that's, you got to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that tends to be the woman tends to be more passive, and the man tends to be more authoritarian. I'm in charge, not across the board, but often. The other thing that you said is the term from the partner, not ready to be a parent, and no conversation. You know, that's not a conversation I think most people have. I think some people say, do you want kids? But I don't think most people sit down and say, what does the strategy look like for raising children? You know, I don't want to stay home, or I want to stay home, or I want to do this. We just sort of know in our mind like what we want, and then all of a sudden, what if we don't agree? So I think, well, it came on fast for you guys. That's also a super common thing that I hear parents talk about. And Heather's right, my journey was very different. I came out of a home where, I don't know why I knew this. My family was amazing in so many ways, but there were these levels of things happening there that were really not right and not okay, based on particularly one person. So instead, what happened for me is I felt when my children were very young, I was seeking parenting methods, but not in an exhausting way. I found, luckily, when my kids were in preschool, a method that really supported the way I'd want to parent. And so I went really deep with that learning, and what happened as a result is there were two things I used. But I felt when my kids were quite little that I was breaking in two. That's how I say it. And what I did not realize is there's a model to which we're bound, and we're pretty much everybody's bound to this model of control and enabling, which is, you know, narcissism and codependency to some degree. But the problem with that I couldn't articulate until about 8 years later, is I kept aiming for the middle. And as a result, that's why I felt like I was actually breaking in two, because I couldn't be over here and I couldn't be over here. I was trying to be here, and then I try and be here. And that achievement of doing that is really challenging. But the result with an empathic, highly sensitive, or an intuitive child is going to be that they maintain their relationship with their knowing. And when Heather talks about her daughter at 8 years old having anxiety disorder and all these things mounted on top of it, to me, and I'm not saying, I'm not a doctor, I'm not saying that this is right across the board, yet from listening to parents who have children who are mentally ill in a group, I can pick out the parents who have a kid who is a highly sensitive child. And these children that I was listening to, some of them were adults at this point, but I can say to the parents, does your child behave like this? Are they able to do this? Did this bother you about them when they were kids? And they'll say yes, and then it kind of clarifies, okay, that I hit correctly. I can't necessarily, if you stand there and tell me things randomly about your child, that I can hear, okay, you have a highly sensitive child. But what I'll tell you is I noticed, and I'm a highly sensitive child who, as a young one, kind of was Heather's daughter, but I did not get any help. My parents instead piled it on top of me and told me I was bad and I was wrong, or, you know, they tried to like beat it out of me. Not that there was beating going on, like push it on me so hard that I just give it up, or I don't know what. And that was a massively heavy burden to carry. And so with my own children, I'm sure my desire to break that was large. So that was curious to me as to what was going on. The thing that is tricky, and this is what made me be able to really hear it in that room with those parents talking about their children and see the ones that are highly sensitive, is if you separate the highly sensitive child from their knowing, they are in trouble. So if they can't hear that inner voice, or can't realign. So I have an example in my daughter. She came home from kindergarten and said to me, "I'm overwhelmed." And I thought, what? Sassy old me. But I didn't say that. I stood there and I thought, I don't know what to say. And I said, "What can you do about it?" And she then allowed herself to feel the emotion of it. And I saw her eyes, like get Charlie Brown eyes, where she just really settled into the overwhelm. And then I gave her option, like, well, some kids might do this, some kids might do that, some kids might do that, and so on. But it freed her up. And then I said, "You come back to us when you're ready," which also for a highly sensitive child allows it on their terms. And that's part of their problem is if they keep having things that they have to do on other people's terms, they can't stay in touch with that knowing. Because a highly sensitive child, if you said to them, "What do you want to learn about?" "I want to learn about trains today." They would go to the library and get out books on trains and realize that doesn't interest them at all. But then they get out books on bugs and they sit there all day and they teach themselves to read. They're very highly self-sufficient and adapt. And so the method of teaching, of being rote and in a classroom, is not necessarily conducive to many of them. Some of them can handle it. But for my daughter, 2.5-hour kindergarten, she came home and she was overwhelmed because the space is chaotic. There are kids screaming. Not that it's bad, it's just too much for her and it's too overstimulating. So she quickly learned how to decompress and learned she could only go to the sleepover one weekend day, but I never said anything. I said it was okay if she went to both, but she would make decisions for herself because then she could manage that power and leverage the choices about that will leave me overwhelmed on Monday at school. There's too much people time. And so when we let them do that and we let them self-regulate, it's very successful. But it sounds like I'm saying she's going to say, "I'm not going to go to grandma's party, at 1 today." That doesn't happen. It's not about that. It's not the child being in control. It's the child being empowered. So my child might come to me and say, "Mom, I really want to go to grandma's today, and I absolutely can't do it. Is there a way I can work that out?" "Well, why don't you bring the car and come later now that she's a driver?" My kids are just turned 19. Today's her birthday. Woohoo! And our son is 16 years old. He's a junior in high school. So the idea there is that when what I've witnessed is empathic, highly sensitive children, and I don't have broad enough range of children, but they break down and become anxious at either 6 or 7. Generally, it's when they enter first grade because the style of learning has vastly changed from experiential, communicative, downtime to this intensive, you're going to sit at your desk, we're going to stand up and do jumping jacks together. There's not this freedom to express themselves. Not that they need to, do things that others aren't doing. It's more they are very self-governing by nature because they're so highly observant. They're very aware. And having this really rigid world, I think, is really too much on their little nervous systems because they're like, "I have to do it your way. And if I don't do it your way, it's not good enough." And it becomes a mess. Instead of do it your own way, be free. There's this creativeness to these kids. There's also this ability to see beyond what other kids can see. So there's a component there that we don't want to squash down because it's actually a huge benefit to our society. So needless to say, I'm like, "Oh, Heather, let me give it back to you." That these children, here's what I feel, is when they're 7 years old and they shut down in a classroom setting or at school, they don't want to go to school, they get stomach aches, they get headaches. What's happening for them is they are resisting the model of how they're being educated. It's not that the school is bad. It's not that the teacher's bad. The teacher could be the sweetest thing on earth. But then it's about communicating with the teacher, and it's about teaching the kid how to communicate with the teacher. Can you ask the teacher, "Hey, could I do that assignment this way?" But it's not constantly making the teacher dance for the child. It's this relationship of how does the child start to learn how to communicate and learn disappointment. The teacher doesn't want you to do it that way this time. And they can come home and that's disappointment. What do you want to do about it? And help them through. Well, maybe if I build a strategy of how I'm going to get that assignment done, then they start to learn lifelong skills. So this is the importance of it. And I've said to my kids when they, maybe in 1 year they had a really crummy teacher, and I said, "You know what? It teaches you how to recognize a bad boss. If you have a boss when you work out in the world, or like Heather and I are self-employed, so maybe you have somebody in your networking group or something, and you're like, I get red flag. I want you to be able to see that. And with that teacher, you can see how that works. You can learn how to work with them, even though you don't agree with them or understand how their ilk is. We also don't want to push kids that are sensitive in too far. If the teacher, like we had one teacher at school that if my kids had gotten in her class, I would have taken them out of that school if I had to, because it was way too far for who they are. She was aggressive and mean, and why the school didn't remove her is way beyond me, but that's not my deal. I ended up not having to deal with that. So there's a balancing point as the parent with these kids. We coach and we observe and we support them that way. How can I help you? But we let them lead, because if we take away their power of choice to a certain degree based on their age, I'll explain that a little more, that they start to shut down because they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do anything because I don't know how to make a choice anymore. That piece is so tender or gentle inside of them. It's like the knowing, and that internal voice gets really contorted. So if you have a kid who's a little bit older, 8, 9, 10, I believe what they are bucking is that model of the social structure. Now you have to remember, these kids are way ahead of the other kids emotionally. They're starting to already see that this experience of middle school is coming, where the social structure and the hierarchy is coming down the pipe. And these kids know that that is not something that works for them. They see every human as an individual. They see the teacher and themselves as more of an equal. It's a little confusing for these kids to be like, why are you more important than I am when you're so mean to me? Like they might say something like that because it makes no sense to them, because they know better that seems wrong. So these kids, I believe the social structure of how people interact is starting to really bother them, and they don't know how to articulate it because they're just like, it just feels wrong, Mom. It just feels bad when I go to school. The kids are saying things that I don't like to hear, but that makes no sense, So there's that possibility. And then kids that are a little bit older, they may have been compensating. Like maybe they had a little bit of Asperger's or autism, or they could have something else going on in there that helped them to assimilate to the situations and move along. But then they can kind of have a blowout. It generally tends to be around 7th grade, where they recognize, I don't fit, I'm very different, I can't fit into this social structure the way it is. They might start to isolate more, which is not actually necessarily a bad thing for these kids, which seems so counterintuitive, but forcing them to be with others is like, I don't know, giving a stabber a knife. It's a weird thing to say, but it's not necessarily the healthiest idea for them. So I was going to give you an example that I forgot now. Heather, do you remember what I said? Oh, all right, it'll come. So anyway, I've said a lot about how these kids operate. The idea there's a lot of construct as a parent, but what I will tell you is undeniably your empathic, intuitive children are 100% your easiest to parent when you are empowered with them. And that takes a lot of you as a parent, because every parent I've worked with and everybody I've ever met, I'm not kidding, is a part of this model and they can't see it. And so breaking free of that model is pretty darn tricky. But once we can separate ourselves from that and keep aiming at the power, coaching our kids, it is so easy to parent them. They are very free-flowing because they follow what they know. And like my kid, who's 19, from kindergarten to now, there's somebody who they know, nope, I'm not going to take a job this summer. And her dad and I were like, oh my gosh. But then when we looked at the end of the summer in hindsight, we thought there's no way she could have had a job. She was traveling for like 5 weeks out of the summer. It would have been too much. So these kids know, and trusting that is good. And also learning where to push them is really another massively important thing. You push them into where they are naturally prone and successful to very high levels, because they need to be around, to some degree, top performers in some of these arenas that they are so strong at, so that they can relate to other people who can take them to even higher levels yet. Tricky children. But a lot of us have them. A lot of families have one kid who feels like they don't fit. They're just different. And that's it. That's a good way. They're too much. They're too emotional. They might be uncomfortable in their clothes and be bothered by it. They might want to sit in a certain place in the car. And you might think that's OCD of them. Well, it's not. The seat is what they expect. The seat feeling they know. It really helps them stay more calm.
I just wanted to say too, wherever you are in your parenting journey, so Amy said that they're your easiest child to parent. And I think for me, I always felt like she was so challenging because I didn't understand her. I didn't understand that I had this child that was sensitive. So I think I was fighting it too because I wanted her to be a normal child. So I was pushing her into things that weren't right for her. And I was overcompensating. Like I would give in to her and I would coddle her. And I was kind of doing all kind of maybe the wrong things for a highly sensitive child or an empath, but I didn't know better. And totally, I'm not like blaming myself. I'm accepted where I am in my journey. And that's what we were meant to do for her and me. And we've come to this great place now. But I've been writing a book, and the beginning of the book is even like, I had this challenging child and I didn't know what to do, so that is where some of you might be. And so Amy has learned this amazing technique of parenting these children. And I've told Amy, I wish I had her as a friend back when my daughter was young, because I would have went to her and said, help me, because I felt so lost and confused, and that my child was different and no one else seemed to have a child like that. And I think going to my pediatrician right away, like what's going on with my daughter, they saw it as mental illness. And not even once did I hear the word highly sensitive child from them. And Dr. Elaine Aron has a book called The Highly Sensitive Child. So you guys, if you feel that that is your child, you could look at that and read that, and it will be very affirming to you, I'm sure. So I just want you to recognize wherever you are in your journey, if you have an older child and you're just learning this now that they are sensitive, or if you have young children and you can bring these techniques in, we're here to support you in anywhere you are in your journey, because we've both been there and we both are sensitive ourselves. And I think when I heard the term empath, I could look back in my own life and see how I was raised and how it affected my childhood. And it brought me more understanding then to support my daughter.
I think when I have, judgment day where I get to review my life when I go to the other side, I'll be like those super cute guys that watch football games and are like, oh.
What did I do? Yeah.
Like, oh, I knew that. Or, oh my gosh, look at how wrong that was for me when I was so sensitive. Just, man, yeah. The thing I will say, then maybe we need to sum up here, but is the techniques that I learned are so simple. They almost feel impossible to put into play at first. And it takes repetition of different situations to come up, and the audacity as a parent to think, how can I get my kids? Which makes it kind of fun, because it sort of is playful, like, how can I be one step ahead of them? But it's not malicious. It's just this good-hearted, how do you look at that? And that's the piece that makes it tricky, and what made it really tricky for me is I understood the concept of the technique, but then how do I apply it to this and this and this and this and this and this kid and this kid? That's what was very hard at first. But once I started getting it, I remember being in a basketball game where the parents were like, had one foot to sit in on the edge. And my kid came sneaking down and said, Mom, blah, 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 blah. And they'd been doing something kind of naughty in the hall, a group of kids. And I said one statement to my child, and she went out and everything realigned out there. And my friend next to me said, you are so gentle. And so like, you're amazing at this. And I think that is the beauty of it, is it really becomes magic when you have that much power, because you're also sharing that with the child. That sounds kind of silly, but that's really what happens. So that's worth it, you guys. These kids are worth it. They've got so much to give, and they're so lost in this system that is not aligned to them, and it shouldn't align to them. They can learn to live within it, but it's how do you do that, and how do you deal with that at home so they stay confident to keep accelerating into the things that are really their sweet spots. We can do it.
You can do it. You can do it no matter what like I said, the age, because Ellie was 14 once I'm like, oh, okay, we need some changes to happen.
Right. Sure. And there are different ages that are harder for kids too. So, I mean, it's really nice when you have some techniques. And I said to myself, I want to have good drivers. And then that's what led all of this and drove it. Oh, it drove it is how do you level-headed driver that thinks on their feet and is making good decisions and realizing the gravity of driving a car and having that ability.
Maturity. Yeah. So Amy and I decided, well, we were kind of pushed or nudged, right, to offer a free webinar about parenting the highly sensitive child or the empath. And we did it and turned around really quickly. So we're offering it on Saturday, the 17th. It's completely free. We'll give more information to you. Do you want to talk more about it? I know it's kind of
3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I'd encourage you to join us because we'll talk about that model more in depth and how it keeps us stuck and exactly how that looks. So you might be able to see, I'm not defining who a highly sensitive child is completely, but you might be able to see your child in that mix and say, oh, I can see what's going on with that. And Heather and I, we really got asked to teach parenting classes. And so we have dragged our feet a little bit because we don't want to put the cart before the horse. But we will be moving this webinar into a very small group of people to teach about parenting, as well as Heather will be really focusing on the parent and all of the pieces that come with that of being recognizing yourself, putting yourself as an important piece in the mix. And I'll be focusing on parenting and what to do in these situations. And what we're offering beyond the webinar has a lot of interactive support so that you can really clinch it, because it's that piece of the repetition. And I know exactly what it feels like to want to run away and cry because I've done it.
Yeah,
trying to figure out what to do when you're like, you as a parent, you get blinders on. I mean, that's what makes people that don't have parents such good parents is, of course, they can rationally see what to do. They aren't exhausted. They've eaten. They actually got to use the bathroom by themselves. Right? I mean,
totally.
they walk the dog and the dog's happy. Your dog is like whining at the door. It's just, I get it.
Yeah, we get it. Totally. And we do have our Patreon too. We continue these conversations and call them deeper conversations, and it's only for our Patreon members. So there is a link on here for that as well. And that helps support us so that we can continue to put our work out there. Amy and I are both writers, so we're working on that. And so that helps support us to do that as well. And next week we have, is a common stomach ache really just that for an empath? We briefly mentioned that a little bit today, but we'll go deeper with that.
Yeah, that's Heather's arena.
Yeah, watch out.
Watch out. Here comes the wild.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yes. Thank you. Take care, and we'll see you next week. If you have questions on anything, please feel free to leave a comment, and those links are in here for you to check out. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.